and private land use controls, encumbrances, public controls, governmental rights in land, PEAT. Police power is the power given to a municipality to regulate and control the character and use of property for the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. Zoning is the most common example of police power. Zoning regulations are local laws to control land use. For example, R1 zoning means residential, single family only. A change in zoning may result in a non-conforming use. This use was permissible under former rules, but new rules prohibit it. A non-conforming use is allowed to continue as it is considered grandfathered. The non-conforming use is automatic. No hearing or application process is required. A non-conforming use cannot be altered or expanded without permission, but it can be sold to a party who wishes to continue the existing use. If the property is destroyed, the non-conforming use may not be rebuilt without permission. Note, there is no violation of zoning here. If your property violates zoning, you may request a variance. A variance may also be requested prior to construction. Adding on to the front of a building would usually require a variance. This is because most buildings are constructed on the building line. A setback is the space between the lot line and the building line. Construction must be set back from the lot line. The setback can also be described as the amount of land required surrounding improvements. Front setback, side setback, rear setback, etc. Example, an owner who wanted to extend his garage beyond the setback line would be in violation of zoning and would need a variance. The process to obtain a variance is to apply to the zoning committee. A hearing will be scheduled and all neighborhood property owners will be invited to the hearing to voice any objections they might have to the variance. A variance goes with the property when the property is sold. A conditional or special use can be granted by a zoning committee or deed restrictions, HOA. This use would benefit the neighborhood like a school within a residential subdivision. Zoning sets use categories. When a specific single use is required, this is a deed restriction. Example of property that can only be used for a hospital. Another type of conditional use is a PUD, P-U-D, a planned unit development. A PUD zone allows for a higher population density with houses clustered together. There are 3 common characteristics of a PUD. The developer will provide a green space for residents of the PUD. A nonprofit HOA will maintain the green space. Residents will pay an extra tax to the HOA for the maintenance of the green space. A buffer zone is an area of land separating one land use from another, such as residential from commercial. The buffer zone is located between incompatible uses. The buffer zone is a transitional use. Example, single-family apartments, retail. The apartments are the buffer zone. The government also has the right to regulate special land types for the public good, including coastal properties and wetlands. Standards have been set to keep construction a set distance from protected wetlands. The space between the wetlands and construction is another example of a buffer zone. Police power provides the government with the right to establish building codes. Specific construction requirements, designs, materials, safety guidelines, etc. can all be regulated. New construction frequently requires a certificate of occupancy to be issued. 2. Eminent domain is the right of the government to take private property for public use through the action of condemnation. This is the only time the government must compensate property owners. When an individual forces the government to buy his or her property, this is called inverse condemnation. 3. Taxation. Property taxes are the highest priority lien on real property. Property taxes are ad valorem taxes or according to value. Unpaid taxes create an automatic lien on property. At foreclosure, property taxes are always paid first. 4. Escheat. Property reverts to the state when someone dies, leaving no will and no heirs or kindred. Escheat can also be used if property is abandoned. Abandonment is a legal term. It describes an act of surrendering or forfeiting rights or property. The purpose of escheat is to ensure that no land remains unowned. Private controls, restrictions, and encroachments. The most common private controls of land use are CC and Rs, deed covenants, conditions, and restrictions. CC and Rs are commonly referred to as deed restrictions or deed covenants. HOA, Homeowners Association, or POA, Property Owners Association, regulations are like deed restrictions but usually apply to condominium complexes and subdivisions. These private controls of land use are contractual obligations that a buyer agrees to when purchasing the property. Deed restrictions are imposed to control land use, development, and methods and materials for construction. Style and appearance requirements can also be enforced, garages facing the rear of the property, etc. They are found in a recorded document called a Declaration of Restrictions. They are imposed by the grantor. Violation can result in civil court action brought by other property owners who are bound by the same deed restrictions. The court will issue an injunction to enforce the restrictions. In some cases, deed restrictions and zoning can both exist. If this is true, although both must be disclosed, whichever is most restrictive or limiting must be obeyed. Deed restrictions are permanent in most cases and do not expire. They control present and future owners and tenants. An encumbrance is a limit on a property or a limit on a property's owner's rights that may or may not be also on a cloud on the title. The following are all examples of encumbrances. A reservation imposed by the grantor withholds title to a part of the land described in the deed, example, an easement or mineral rights. When a structure or improvement overlaps or trespasses onto another's property, it is an encroachment. Encroachments must be disclosed. The determination of an encroachment requires a survey. Note, a listing agent discloses an encroachment. A buyer's agent recommends a survey. In the case of an encroachment, the injured party has the right to demand the removal of the encroachment. An easement allows limited use or enjoyment of another's land. It is a right in land and should be created in writing and recorded. It is use without possession. Easements can be created by express, written or verbal, or implied by actions or evidence. Grant, usually as part of a sale agreement, usually separate from a sale. Reservation, a seller keeps an easement at the time of sale. Limitation or prescription, acquired by constant use without permission, usually at least 10 years. Necessity, granted by the courts. Condemnation, taken by the government under eminent domain. The government will take an easement for itself, the utilities or the railroads, any project that benefits the public. Easements can be terminated by merger, acquiring the adjacent property, release, a recorded document used to terminate a right or claim, abandonment, an action that terminates rights. Dominant and servient estates. If you have two parcels of land with a road access